I'm Erica.
And I'm CJ.
And you're listening to the Her Podcast. Today, we are very honored to have Victory Aspinall joining us. Her journey is one of resilience, self-discovery, one where she shares the courage that she had to break free from a situation that she now knows and refers to as a cult. Victory talks about her involvement with a religious group, which she later came to identify as a cult. For 15 years, she navigated life in this group only to reach a turning point where she chose to walk away, marking the beginning of a new chapter in her life. We chat with Victory about her experience joining a cult, what life inside a cult was like, how her family staged an intervention that led to her decision to leave, and the challenges she faced adapting to life after leaving a cult. This one has a lot going on. We were on the edge of our seat the entire time. We know you're going to love hearing from Victory, so enjoy. I don't even know where to start with you.
No, we need to get into it though. But I'm like,
this is going to be a really interesting conversation today. Mm-hmm. We're really happy you're here. Happy to be vulnerable with us. When did everything start for you? Like, when were you first introduced to what you thought was a church?
Yeah. Well, they called it a praise and worship or a ministry, but it was never, it wasn't called a church.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I was maybe 12 because I was homeschooled grade 2 to the middle of grade 8. And so during that time, I would go and stay with my sister and her husband. And then they started going to this group. A whole series of events, things took place that they started going. And I started with them, and it started super it was simple. It was they rented a church building. It was on Tuesday nights, and it was a praise and worship. And so you would go there, and there would just be music playing, and it was super relaxed. And for me, coming from a very charismatic Christian household, we did a lot of traveling for ministry growing up, and going from that to this the group leader would say, if you want to stand, you can stand. If you want to sit, you can sit. If you want to sing, you can. But it was just so relaxed and laid back, and that was really foreign to what I was used to and what I grew up in. And so when I visited my sister, I'd go with them periodically, but I wasn't going full time. And
it was all very normal. It's not like you walk in and you're like, this feels weird.
No, not off the bat. No, it wasn't at all. And so that's why, as a kid too, I was just I like this. And there were some girls who were my age, and so I also developed friendships with them. They also lived out where Terry and Jackie lived at the time, and so I got to know them separate from this group. And so we'd go to hockey games together and whatnot. I eventually, I don't know if I'm going too fast, I moved in with my sister and her husband when I was 15.
Why?
Throughout the years, I had gone, and maybe for a few months I'd live with them because Jackie had some issues just with her pregnancy and whatnot. So I'd go and I'd help her out.
Can I ask who's Jackie and Terry?
So Terry and Jackie's my sister.
Okay.
She is 9 years older than me. Yeah.
Thank you.
And Terry's her husband. Yeah. And so they were part of this group before I was. I was really close with my sister eventually. Yeah. And then just, as I grew up, we just were, besties. And so I ended up, some things had happened for me with friends where I ended up going out drinking, whatever. And all of this was such a big deal at the time. And so it got back to the group and the group leader. And then unbeknownst to me, all of these conversations started happening behind the scenes with Terry and Jackie and the group leader. And he, at one point, and I heard this later, called Terry and said, what do you I've just been thinking about Victory and knowing what she's going through. Do you think it would be good for her to be here? And so that conversation started. And then eventually they had a conversation with my parents, but I did too, in telling them this is what's going on. This is happening, because I can't lie. So I wasn't growing up when I did do things that I was like, well, I don't know if I should have done that. I was pretty honest because the guilt just hit me pretty hard. And so I talked to my parents and ended up saying I don't want to go down this path, yada, yada. And then maybe it's a good idea for me to move in with Terry and Jackie, and then I have friends out there and also go be part of this group full time.
Well, and you don't have to name specifics, but like how far away were your parents and your sister? Were they close?
It would have been probably 3 hours.
Oh,
they were
okay.
My parents were,
And was that hard for them?
Yeah. And I was their youngest. So, I mean, the youngest of 6 kids. Yeah. And so I moved out when I was 14 to 25. Yeah. So like those pretty intense years, and my parents didn't have their youngest around. So
what was it like for you to find out that the leader of this organization, which I think we can just say it's a cult, right? Like, well, if we just want to like cut right to it, right? Is that it was a cult? Yeah. It is a cult. Like, did you find that out and you were like, this person is trying to orchestrate my life at all? Or what was that like for you?
So it all started when Terry and Jackie left. So they left a year and a half before I did. And that was because this was such an intense group where there was this belief that if you were to leave and speak against it, say things negatively, that you would have like the wrath of God come upon you, or you maybe go to hell, or you like intense belief. And so Terry and Jackie, I get a phone call one morning and it's my sister and she's bawling and she's like, we've decided to leave. And it's this view of like, there's a death in the family. That's honestly how you view it. It's not just, oh, hey, we've decided to go to a different church. It's no, we're leaving. And it's this view of like, our whole relationship is going to change. Like, what's going to happen? And it was awful. And it was such an extreme reaction that I had. And I didn't know details. I didn't know why. I just knew that they had decided to leave.
Well, and how old were you when they decided to leave?
24.
Okay, wait. So I want to go back to when you went in. I made your question jump ahead, but all of a sudden I was like, wait a second, what? We just lost what just happened here? No, go ahead.
Okay, so anyways, things happened. I ended up moving in with my sister and her husband, and then I went to high school out in a rural community, but then I could go to meetings more often. And so at that point in time when I was in high school, our week would look like we'd have like these small groups on Tuesdays. We would have a meeting in Saskatoon on Thursdays. We would drive 2.5 hours twice a week, sometimes 3 times a week into Saskatoon for these meetings. So, and this was the schedule at the time. So Thursdays you'd come in for a meeting, and then Sundays you'd come in all day. It wasn't just an hour church service. You would be there all day. And on Thursdays, you would start at 7:30 and we would be there till like midnight. We would get home at 2:30 in the morning and we would all go to school and go to work the next day. This was our life.
Well, okay, so because this is at this time like a group, like why couldn't you just be like, no, we're not doing that. That's not sustainable for us.
Because we believed wholeheartedly that what we were in was that it was God and that we were called to be there. And so at that point you have this, like you see there were positive things that happened. There were like alcoholics who recovered. There was positive, like there were families who were on the verge of divorce and separation and marriages were healed. Like positive things happened. But eventually you come to realize that these things happened, but it was based on this system and this group that you were in. And if you were to leave, it was this belief because Stan ingrained it in us that if we were to leave, basically we would go backwards. Like there were times where I would sit there and he would say, like, aren't you just thankful you are here? Because if you weren't, you probably like would have ended up pregnant. Like maybe he would say to different people, like on drugs, so you have this, it starts off so slow and it's like this build up. You'd get built up within this group. It's so positive. You feel safe. You're with this person who you feel has your best interests in mind. And so you are so vulnerable and so open. And for me at the time, I didn't have a ton of life experience. And so none of this was really odd to me.
You're like a teenager at this time. Yeah.
Yeah. And so for each person, obviously their situation, it was different, but so similar. Like there were so many people where so much help came to them in this group. But then if they were to maybe question it or maybe think, I don't really know if this is the place for me, the leader would go back to look at everything that has happened for you here. Do you want to go back to what it was like before? Do you want to go back into depression? Do you want to go back into when your family just about split apart? Like, or Victory, do you want to end up pregnant? Do you want to end up in an abusive relationship? So you have such a low view of yourself apart from the group. And so you're so afraid. Like while I was there, I wouldn't say that I had a lot of anxiety, but I truly bought in and I believed that this was so I call it a Bible-based cult. So you have there's different cult groups, all like political cults, whatnot. And so this was all based on you'd say that we were Christians, that we believed in God, but the leader took scripture and completely twisted it to manipulate and to control. And certain things, like he would never directly tell you to do something or to make this big life choice. It would be this series of meetings and conversations and questions. And eventually you would think that you're making your own decision, but ultimately he manipulated it and you ended up making that decision because of him or because of the group. We all ended up at one point all wearing long skirts on Sundays. We wore long skirts and we wore head coverings.
How did that happen?
So one lady came in with a head covering and then someone, and details, I don't know. It was a long time ago. You might have someone who is in that group listen to this one day and be like, she's a little off. Well, most likely not. I sit here when I talk about this in different podcasts that I've done, and it's on one side, I am sharing this truth of what my experience was like and everything that took place. But then on the other side, I have this cult mindset of when I was there, and I know how I would have responded if I was in the group and how I would have combat some of the conversations or things that I'm saying that I know to be true. But in there it would be well, no, it wasn't like that. No, it actually didn't happen that way because you're so because I don't
want to say brainwashed. I don't want to say
you can though.
Okay. Yeah. I was I don't want to be offensive here, but if that's what it sounds like you're saying is that you're almost brainwashed into being this is what I have to say, or this is how I need to behave.
That's what part of brainwashing they talk about is you dim the lights. You speak to someone for hours at a time. That's what it was like. We sat in this. It was there's a large building and we leased it, built certain rooms and whatever, but we had the main overhead lights were always off. There were just lamps on. The lighting was dim. And the leader would talk for hours and hours. And some, you talk about scripture sometimes, or sometimes he'd talk about this article that was touching on prophetic and apostles in the Bible. And then you just sit there for hours. And then they had this mic and you'd come up and you'd talk about what was just spoken. But some people would fall asleep. Rightly so. You've been sitting there for hours. I was
going to say,
but then
Erica, how you gonna make it through that?
That ADHD, they would have kicked me out so fast.
And then you would get,
except I'd forget everything.
Leader would, and this goes into a whole nother wing. There's public chastisement, and so the leader would see someone falling asleep and would yell at them and be like, "Is what I'm saying not good enough for you?" Or you and would freak out. And so, but you think leaving afterwards and looking back, well, no wonder people were falling asleep. The lights were dim and we sit here for hours and hours.
Okay. But my question is, how do you go from these public worship nights of do what you want, come be who you are, which in essence of what I believe as a Christian is great, right? Mm-hmm. But I'm how do you go from that to publicly chastising someone as you're speaking? Cause I'm this feels 0 to 100.
Mm-hmm. You take the scripture where it says, correct someone in the presence of all so that they all might fear.
But at this point, is this now not public? Not just anyone can come.
There would have been still some public chastisement when it was open. I don't remember the timeline of when he actually said, the Lord spoke and said, the doors are closed. So there was a point in time where he said the doors are closed. People can't come anymore. Like there were times where my parents would come and sit during a meeting. They thought it was strange. They never felt comfortable with it, but it was still kind of open for them to be there. But then eventually it was said that there's just too much personal things happening here. There's too many, like this, we're such a close-knit community. And so if someone just comes off Joe Blow from the street, sits in here, it's uncomfortable for people and they don't know the history behind it.
So 2 questions. Maybe how many-ish people were in it when it was closed? And what did you think being inside of it, but in the mentality when he said it was closed? Were you like, okay, great.
There would have been, for the majority of its, well, for the cult life, it still's going, but there would have been around 90 people.
Okay.
And a lot of kids and maybe 15 to 20 single women.
Hey friends, it's Erica here. As you may know, my family and I recently sold our house and bought the family farm. And now we're living in constant renovations, and that's just a whole nother story for a different day. When we decided to move, I was not looking forward to walking through the process of selling our home. You can just ask Nick about it. I was dreading it. But then I met Lacey. Lacey Cossette is an award-winning Saskatoon realtor who prides herself in being your one-stop shop for both buying and selling. She is super passionate about helping her clients find their forever home, and honestly, it shows up when you meet her. Lacey was fun, energetic, listened to our needs, and when the time came for negotiations, well, I'm just really happy she was in my corner. With over 12 years in the industry and a 98% list-to-sale ratio, Lacey finds the best individual approach and plan for her clients, including extensive and personalized market strategies. And we all know that is more important now more than ever. Along with her husband and partner, Kyle Berneski, Lacey is licensed in residential, commercial, and farm. So she literally has you covered no matter what real estate area you need. And she has built solid and long-standing relationships within the industry so she can dial up the best lawyers, mortgage brokers, appraisers, contractors, whatever you guys really need. If you want a driven, hardworking, and connected agent who will go above and beyond for you, this is a no-brainer, my friends. Get in touch with Lacey. You can find her at Realty Executive Saskatoon, on socials at Lacey Cossette. That's at LACEYCOSSETTE, and online at laceycossette.com. And don't worry, friends, we will link all of her stuff in the show notes in case you're driving and you can't click right now.
Oh, honestly, when you said that, I was right in. There's so many things I look back and now I'm just like, what is wrong with you, Victory? Like, why did you? But when you have this belief and that this is like God formed this, that God has called me here, or you hear the words something greater than yourself so much. And you're like, I am in this thing, this place that is greater than myself. And you feel it's like greater than what other people are in outside of the group. Well, then there's that sense of like, oh, like I don't want to lose this. Like this is where I want to be. And there's a lot of focus on the end times. And like we briefly touched on this before we started, but Stan had said the Lord spoke to him that he would keep him until the end. What's the end? I don't know, but he passed away in 2020 and this group is still going and we are still here. So being an outsider now after leaving, and I look at that and I think, how can you sit in there now and believe that what you're in is true? But he would have a way of twisting certain things to make it believable and to kind of move you along and you see, okay, well, no, that makes sense. Like, I understand where there was that change or why this is different. Yeah.
So at what point so the group is closed, closed group, VIP. And at what point are you like, because I know, well, you're living with Terry and Jackie. So what happens there? Do you continue living with them? Do you move out? Like what goes on?
So I lived with them in high school. As soon as I graduated from high school, I moved into Saskatoon. So I was away from them. And then I moved into a house with a group of 4 other single girls.
From the group?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And what was, I mean, I know there's some history there. So what's that idea behind?
Yeah. So that is a lot of it, like, we weren't encouraged to have friends who, like, outside of the group. People still worked, we had jobs, all of that, but that was kind of your only connection to the outside, right? Like, all of your time was usually spent at this group. Like, there was the leader would say, this is keeping you out of the world. This is keeping, especially for those who were there and they were single. It was like, this is keeping you from basically getting in trouble. This is why you're kept so busy here and you're serving the Lord and you're giving up your life for God. And so that it just, at the time, it wasn't strange. It made sense. When I graduated, I'd move in with basically wherever I was told to move in. Because there were 3 different groups of houses that people owned and the girls lived in. And so I just moved in with a group of them.
So it really was like a community that was being run by this leader. And that infiltrated into your education, where you would work, where you would live, and all your relations.
100%. Yeah.
And are your parents watching this being like, what is going on?
Yeah. They all, well, because so much of our time was spent at this group, we didn't spend a lot of time with our families, and that was weird for them. Like, there were certain family trips that my family went on that I said no to, that I'm like, oh no, I'm busy. But it was because I didn't want to miss a meeting, or I didn't want to go. Like, it was never encouraged to go away for a long period of time with your families on a family trip or a family vacation.
Oh, probably because your family would be like, by the way, we're going to dim the lights and tell you what's going on. Yeah. Just kidding. I'm not trying to make a joke of it.
So it's fine. Oh no, we got through this with a lot of dark humor. Honestly, yeah.
I'm interested in the point when you get that call, because a lot happens.
Yeah.
There's a lot of, in your group, my understanding is a lot of mental abuse. Like you said, like, my understanding is the leader could get physical sometimes.
He did, yeah.
And that's a whole different level of, I don't know what you're processing even now, but you're in this, you're like committed to it. What happens when your sister calls you, who's basically brought you like along on this journey, and says, we're leaving?
The leader was pretty smart in the way that he controlled people's lives. And so after I moved into Saskatoon, he did a good job of even separating me from Terry and Jackie. And he brought me, because the only family member who was there for me was my sister, and then Terry. But I didn't, like, my parents weren't there. I didn't have cousins, relatives. There are other people who it would have been like husbands, wives, kids, or just one person or whatnot. But yeah, so he had, in a way, had built me up, and I felt like I was independent and confident, and that this is where I wanted to be. I felt like this foundation was solid. And so when they left, it's like a negative view on them and positive if I am going to stay in this group. If I'm going, like, they would talk about like persecution from your family, or people are going to want you to leave and whatnot. But when you feel this, like, well, I'm not going to leave just because my sister left.
I feel it's kind of almost like an opposite. Like, I feel like that was very smart, because in a way, it would almost, like, you'd think it would go the other way, that if your sister comes to you and is like, hey, I'm sure it wasn't like, hey, I'm kind of done with this group now, you know, but that you would be like, oh, maybe I should be done. But instead you were so convicted to stay.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, you probably would have felt righteous.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly.
Yeah. And like, I'm doing the right thing. And if others are going to fall away, I'm still going to cling to this even more.
And then after they left, we would hear so many things, because my brother-in-law, he needed to know how the heck he ended up in a group like that. Like, there were certain things that transpired in the group where he knew, he wasn't 100% certain, but he knew he had to leave and figure it out. But they had 4 kids there, 4 young kids. So he's like in turmoil, trying to decide, like, hey, do we leave? Do we take our kids out of this? Do we uproot them? Like, this is all they know. This has been their entire life. And so all of this stuff was happening with them. I didn't know anything. They kept it hush hush, because if they would have said anything to me, good chance I would have said something to someone else. As like, I look back now, I'm thinking like, that's so embarrassing. Like, Victory's just a blabbermouth, but it was so common. Like, they called it going upline. And so if you felt that someone was like, doubting isn't sure if they should be there, well, you're going to bring it up to someone because you feel like you have like their whole spiritual life in your hand. So you're like, well, this is going to do good things for you if I go and tell
like
someone,
no safe
right?
space then. Like
no,
you couldn't talk to
your
anybody.
life was a open book. We had sponsors, so there were certain people that we would talk to, and you would talk about everything with them. But if they ever felt like what you were saying, if they couldn't help you, or maybe you were like gonna go off the rails here, then they would bring it upline and it would go up to this one woman who stands like right hand man, but a woman, which is weird because he was married, and this woman was not his wife. And so it would go up to her, and then eventually she might think, oh, should we bring it to him? And then it would go up to him, and then maybe there would be a big meeting called specifically for this situation. And you end up in what you'd call the hot seat at the very front in the sanctuary, and you're getting yelled at. And you're like, something happened. I wore shorts to summer camp one year, and this was before I was fully living with Terry and Jackie. I was still with my family, so I went to camp for a week and found out that I was wearing shorts, and I got in trouble for it. Like, it was that extreme. It was like every part of your life was infiltrated by this group. And so I find out that Terry and Jackie are leaving, and then all of this stuff, like my brother-in-law was reading scripture, reading books on cults, all of this to figure out like, what did I end up in? And like, did I make the right choice with leaving? Because he described it as we just had to roll out. We didn't fully know if what we were doing was the right thing, but they just had to take a step back. But for us being in the group, it was this view of you're gone forever. Like, you're not coming back. And so they leave. Our relationship was very like broken at that point. The leader totally like destroyed my brother-in-law's character, would say things like he's deceived by Satan. He's like, God have mercy on him for speaking out against this place and against God's prophet. And so he had all of his siblings who were in this group, all of his siblings' kids. They were the same age as my nieces and nephews. They all lived in close proximity to one another. After they left, there was almost zero contact. These kids would who used to be friends with their cousins really close, hardly even talk to them. To this day, when they still lived in close proximity, my nieces and nephews, they'd come outside to go play, hang out with the kids. The one mom would open the door and be like, hey, it's supper time, like bring the kids in. And so there was very little contact. All of those relationships were broken after they left, and mine and my sister's. And so then I can get into the intervention and go into all of that.
That's what I want to get. Let's get there, because obviously you're sitting here now. So you're sharing all this stuff, and you're like, this was wild. And I do think it's important to say the one thing I learned, I think the first time I heard this quote was from Terry, and it's the frog. The frog. You put a frog in boiling water, he'll jump out. Yeah. You put a frog in water and you turn on the burner. Cold water, and it'll boil to death. And I really think that's what was happening to you, because it's 100%. Not like you sit here and you're like, I walked into this group and night one we were told to wear long skirts and head coverings, and he was physically hurting people or or verbally abusing me, sitting there. It really was just a progression of rules and indoctrinating into your mind, right? What was going on. So why, how are you sitting here?
Well, okay. And also to give you a view, as I was driving out here, I was like, I should just give a view of what did a week look like in my life 6 years ago. Because I left August 2017, and 6 years ago, and I was 25. So the leader had this small group of people who were like his inner circle kind of thing. They were all women.
Which is so weird.
Yes. All women. And I was kind of called up into that group too. And so looking back, you're like, oh, this is all felt like it was happening to keep me there as they choose to leave. And so, I was part of this group. And so we would meet with Stan most nights of the week. So you would go to work. Work was normal. Work was a reprieve. I worked doing, there was just a season of really busyness at this job that I worked, and that was a reprieve from the group. And so if I was working late nights, weekends, evenings, I was not complaining because it was a reprieve, but I would have never told anyone that. I wouldn't have been honest at all. And so we would have these meetings. Sometimes we would just go over to his house. We'd hang out in his basement, and sometimes we'd watch shows, but we would watch things like The First 48 or Dateline. And then Stan would pause it and he'd be like, aren't you grateful you're here because you could have ended up as one of those victims or one of those women who were abused in their relationship. Like he would just like take all of these different situations and make it like, aren't you thankful that you're here in this group and that you're safe? And so it was this, you were left so afraid of leaving because you're like, well, I would be a disaster if I were to ever leave. And so so we'd have all those meetings, and then we'd have like meetings with the whole group, usually once a week. We'd meet all day on a Sunday, but then on Saturdays, all of us some of the married people too, we would all do get things done on a Saturday at the group, whether it's like these list of things that Stan or some of the other people who were close to him would have us take care of, or we would end up out. There was this piece of land that a couple had purchased, and the guy who owned it had told Stan, if you ever need a place to go and just get out of the city, feel free to use our land. Well, we ended up basically taking this entire piece of land and using it for the ministry purposes. And so group leader said that God told me that we're supposed to get horses. So all of these things transpired, and they ended up with a bunch of horses on this land. Then they ended up building this thing called the House of Prayer. And the leader said that the Lord told me this was for me, being built for the leader. And we would be out there on Saturdays picking, I don't know if you know, on the side of the road, the weeds, like purple thistle.
Yeah.
We would be walking the fields, picking this purple thistle so that it would stop spreading. We would be going around, they'd have all of these different bushes around the land. All of us single girls would be walking these bushes, picking up all of these branches and twigs and putting them into piles, because the leader said there's one horse that had a bum eye. He said, you don't want the horse to run into this and get his other eye poked out. I'm like, it is a horse? We're picking up. And so, but we had this view of it's God changing our hearts. He would twist it to be you're not picking thistles. You're doing it for the Lord. If you have a negative thought about this, well, there's something wrong with you. And there's something wrong with me if I'm not just happy and willing to be out here all day picking twigs and purple thistle with my sisters.
So my quick interjection. Yeah. At this point, do you think that there was a plan to create basically a community, buildings where people would live, really closed in? He had said at different times that one day we may end up living in community. And it wasn't weird though, because we listened to a lot of conspiracy type things where, I don't know. Yeah. You have some extreme conspiracies, and some are okay, that actually kind of makes sense. But we were listening to some extreme things. And so it just, you'd view the world and you'd see, because the world is crazy right now. And well, I feel it always is, but but we'd focus on all of this, and it would be so intense, and you would have one meeting just specifically about this. So then it just seemed such a big deal. And so then you're well, it makes sense that one day we'll live in community. We're gonna need to go and be together and live off the land. I don't know if you guys have seen the reels on Instagram where it's don't you just want to get together with a bunch of your friends, buy a piece of land, homeschool all your children, and yeah. The idea of living in commune with a group of people is nauseating to me after what I was in. Yeah. And so, that was what my week was like. You wouldn't do anything outside of being sometimes we'd go to a movie, but it would be with. And at this point, just as another interjection or question, are you allowed to date?
Nope. So, oh man, guys, how long is this going to be?
I know, I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. But it started with one girl feeling called to be single. And then through that, I forget the term, but it's, groupthink. It's a term that they talk about with different cult groups. It's groupthink, where one person brings it up, but then everyone else slowly starts to be like, oh no, like I feel the same way. Oh, that makes so much sense. And so like, I believe that some people, it says in scripture, someone like you might be called to be single or you want to be single, but I would believe that if you're called, then you wouldn't have that desire then to get married and to have,
I get what
and
you're
so
saying.
then it wouldn't be this like extreme having to always talk about it, to be like, oh, I had a problem at work today. I flirted with a guy at work. And then you feel guilty about it. Or like, I really want to get married, but I know that I'm dying to self and not, and that God has called me to be single. And so, yeah, it started out with one person, then eventually it just like made its way through to everyone. And so then we all were a group of single women giving up our lives for God.
So my question is, and you can say pass on this if you want to, but I think most of our listeners might be thinking about it as well. So we have all these single women and this one cult leader. Was there sexual abuse happening?
There wasn't, but the amount of control and the way he had it set up, I fully believe there could have been.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't know if there ever was.
To your knowledge.
To my knowledge, when I was there, I never witnessed
I just
anything.
had to ask.
Yeah, that is fine. Because I was thinking
like
about that on the way here.
The progression was leading there. Was leading there.
Yes.
Well, because there was a bit of physical abuse. There obviously was mental abuse, verbal abuse. At one point, this girl, for doing like, you look back now and you're like, he made this such a big deal, but she was just destroyed and yelled at. And he called her, if you think of the worst names that you could call a woman, that is what he called her. But then he builds her back up after. It's like, you needed that so that you could see the wrongdoings, or just, it's crazy.
Were you physically abused?
No.
Okay. But you witnessed it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And she was pushed like in a pretty like intense way.
Yeah.
And at one point she had actually approached him saying like, something like having a bruise or something, but it was completely twisted. And he basically, made her feel like, that it wasn't a big deal.
I think is how abuse goes.
Yeah, right.
Unfortunately,
Totally.
it's usually the other person's problem. So what does it look like for you with the intervention?
Yeah.
Tell us the intervention.
So this
We're
was
on our
a
seats,
year,
the edge of our
and a
seats.
half after my sister and her husband left. We had started planning a family trip, and it was shocking to them that it ended up working out, because it was going to be a week. We planned to go to Cochrane and do like hikes. Well, in my mind, I thought we were doing some hikes. I actually came across some emails from all of that time of planning, and I had sent them all of these ideas. I'm like, oh, we could do this. We could go here. We could, and everyone's like, oh yeah, good idea, Vic. Like, what a good, and now I know they're sitting there thinking, we're not going to do any of that. And so I was planning to fly to Calgary. And we were just having a week-long family trip, staying at a hotel. All the nieces and nephews were coming. And so I take off. And I have to say, just to give you a little bit of insight of just living under this pressure, there was so much anxiety even going on this trip. Like, I was thinking, should I even be doing this? Is this okay? Like,
I just can't believe you were allowed to.
Yeah. And that was, even that, I don't know. I look back and I wonder how that came about. But anyways, flew there. We flew to Calgary, went for supper that night. And again, I'm no idea what's going on. They all know what's going to happen. And so I'm just happy as a clown. Just, let's go for supper. Let's go to the Calgary Tower and all that. And so did that the first night, got back to our hotel. And then the next day, we were all hanging out in my parents' hotel room, and this wasn't strange either. They had a table set up. We were having A&W for breakfast. The kids were in and out. The room was big. We were all just chatting. And then all of a sudden, this niece and nephews were gone. My sister-in-laws were gone. And it was just my parents and my siblings. And then my brother Blaine, they did this very strategically. And because I didn't trust Terry. Terry was like the enemy. So he couldn't be the one to bring this up. And so my brother brought it up, and he just said, we feel like over the past few years, there's just been some like, just dissent with our family. Like, we just feel like we don't have great communication. And so we just want to talk about it, and we want to see what's going on. And so he didn't point it directly at me. I'm sitting there knowing full well that they're talking about me, but he's trying to say it pretty broadly. And then he said, we've hired a family mediator. He's here at the hotel. Would you be willing to sit and listen? And so because he didn't specify and like, well, this is for you and we're concerned about you, it was just general. It was about our family. And so even though I have a pretty good idea of what's about to happen, I said, okay. And so in walks this guy. And at that point, to me, he's like a terrible human. I'm just like, what do you think you're doing? Like, why are you coming to, just mess with my life and these choices that I feel like I've been making freely? And so he asked the question of, oh man, how did he even start? Like, he just wanted to get the conversation going with like our family. And he said, like, he's like, anyone answer, like, do you feel like there's any like issues with your family? What's kind of the biggest thing going on? And then one sibling started talking about another situation with a sibling, and still I'm sitting there and I know where we're getting, but I'm not giving them an inch. Like, I'm just sitting there. I'm just like, I'll waste your time as long as we need to. Like, I'm
used to sitting through meetings.
Exactly. Yeah.
Try me. Right? I've been doing it for years. Let's be honest, as a business owner, managing social media can be a full-time job. It's consuming, it's ever-changing, and also can be very overwhelming. Something I've learned as a business owner myself is that often the little shifts have the biggest impact. If you're looking to make sure that your page tells your audience exactly who you are, what you do, and what they can expect for you, book an Instagram audit with Carousel Media Management today. Erica and I will go through your Instagram account from top to bottom, walking through your bio, your name, your username, your links, your content, your profile photo, content button, hashtags, and more. Your Instagram account is one of the first things that people will search when they go to find you. It's almost like your website or your calling card at this point. So you'll want to make sure that it shows exactly who you are and what people can expect from you. If you need further support for social media management, Carousel Media has your back. We offer one-on-one social media training and mentorship to help you get super clear on your hows and your whys. Visit us on Instagram today at Carousel, Carousel Media Management, where we will give you guys valuable tips. We are always having fun, and you can book a free discovery call with us now to chat. Visit us on Instagram today at Carousel Media Management. That's at CarouselMediaMGMT, where we're over there, Erica and I, sharing valuable tips, having a lot of fun, and we can't wait to connect with you.
And I was already so angry. And so I was just like, whatever, like, try me. And so we sat there, and eventually it gets to my sister, and she is like fed up. She's thinking we are wasting her time.
Like Jackie?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And she just gets right to it. And she just said, I feel like since we have left this group, that my relationship with my sister is gone. Like it's dissolved. Like, you used to come out and visit us. We never see you anymore. You can hardly talk to us. Like, and she was just really honest. And then this family mediator, who I came to know later was a professional exit counselor from Philadelphia that my family hired to do an intervention.
Wow.
Yeah. He wasn't just Joe Blow who kind of like knew his Bible. They were prepared. This was his job, was to get people out. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And they, and again, I found this all out later that like Terry had got in touch with this guy, and they were trying to figure out like, are there any other families who could do this? But it was my family who felt like, you know what, it's either we lose her for good eventually, or we might lose her for good after doing this intervention. But we're willing to risk that. And so after my sister brings up how she feels there's this, just our relationship, the man says, so what do you think about that? I used words that I had learned from the leader if I were to ever end up in a situation like this. And I said, I am not comfortable with this. This is nothing that I want to discuss. I am leaving. And so I got up and I walked out of the hotel room. And then I left and my dad came out because like, this was like, it was horrible for my dad. Like, it was awful for everyone. Obviously, no one wanted to go through it. Nobody wanted to see me go through this. But for my dad to sit there and watch me, like he told me after how hard it was. And there were times he wasn't able to sit in there for much of it. Like he left and he went like whittled sticks with all the grandkids. Like he just left. He had to get out of the room. And he came out and I like was livid. And I just said, how dare you do this to me? Like I thought we were coming on a family trip. And you come and you blindside me and you bring someone and he's like heart of gold, softy, and just can't even handle watching me in pain. And he's just like, I know, and just doesn't say much, but just trying to like keep our relationship. But I was so angry. And then I think I left and ended up going back to my hotel room. And then I called my sponsor in the group and I told her what was going on. And she said to me, she's like, you can make up your own mind, but if I were you, which it's these words that, because I looked up to her. So when I'm hearing her say, if I were you, I'd get on a plane and I'd go home. So she would be hoping that I'm going to get on a plane and go home. But at that point, I don't know what really kept me there, but I just said, okay, like I'm going to go tell them that if we don't actually turn this into a family group, then I will be going home. And so whatever, got off the phone with her. And I knew after making that phone call that this was going to spread with the group. Like I knew that the leader would find out. I knew that all of this was going to happen there. But they also say that with interventions, you need to get them at least, like 6-7 hours away from the group or a flight away because it makes it a little bit more difficult to go back. And so
that's very interesting. I never would have
that
thought
makes
about
sense.
Yeah, that does make sense.
Yeah. Well, years ago, they used to like actually kidnap people in cults and go and like do like this whole exit thing, but then that became illegal because you can't kidnap someone.
Because, jail.
And so anyways, I remember walking to my parents' hotel room, knocking on the door. So I stood there knocking, and then all of a sudden I look to my right and I see my brother-in-law walking toward me, and my heart just starts pounding. And I said, like, go. Like, I'm like, I don't want to talk to you. Like, get away. And I was so angry. And then he ended up like just being like, no, like we need to talk about this. He's very confrontational and he won't, and so, and he will not back down. And so we end up sitting in this hotel hallway for 4 hours, just going at her. This poor lady cleaning the rooms is walking between us, witnessing this. And it wasn't pretty.
She was probably loving it. She was like, took out her AirPods. She's like, I'm going to listen to this instead. Like those videos where it's like hearing the argument at the table next to you. And you're like,
ooh, I got some stuff to share with my family tonight.
What happened at work? Well,
or even at one point, Terry says, he's like, when is it okay to push a woman? And then he actually looked at the cleaning lady. He said, do you think it's okay to push a woman? And she's just like, just like carries on with cleaning. But it was, 4 hours of us
picture him doing that.
Of us just going at her. And then eventually Terry took the words from the leader, but used them kind of against me. And he said, do you remember what Stan used to always say? He'd say, make a decision or make an informed decision, which, hey, that's really smart. Like, do that with things in life. You should make an informed decision. But Stan would say it in the group if we were to be purchasing something. He's like, we need to figure out, like, do a pros and cons list, make a decision, make an informed decision. It was overused. And so, but Terry used this with me, and he said, like, can't you just sit here and hear what this guy has to say? We can talk about it, and then you will be informed. You'll have this information, and then you can either decide to stay or or you make a decision to leave. Like, just listen. And so I think at that point I was just so pretty broken down, but that made sense to me. And I was like, okay. I said that way. And in my mind, feeling like I had such a solid foundation in this group, I was like, okay, that's fine. I'll sit here. I'll listen to what they have to say.
Good luck.
And then I can tell my family, well, I sat here, I did what you wanted me to, but I'm still staying.
Yeah.
And that was what was in my mind. And so we end up going back to the hotel room. So I feel like, I don't know, we did like one hike. Our whole family, we hiked Johnston's Canyon near Calgary. I think it was the worst hike of our entire lives because everyone was so anxious and nobody was happy. We all were like, why are we wasting our time? We should be back at the hotel. My family's paying this guy to do this intervention for me. And it's like, this is a side note too, but a few months ago, I was able to go back and do Johnston's Canyon with my husband and my stepson and my son. And it's like, oh, like so cool to be able to witness, knowing that if this hadn't happened, if 6 years ago when I was here for a week, if this hadn't taken place, I would not have the family that I have today. And so anyways, going back to the hotel, I agreed to stay and listen. And so we sat there through hours. And I mean, it was hours of literal hell of just feeling like I was being like, this foundation that I felt was solid was crumbling. And it was like, it was shattered. And he would like, I would throw different scriptures that I had heard in the group that I felt was like, no, this is confirmation that I should be here. And I don't remember what all of this was, but we'd just go back and forth. But then he would come back and he would say, but that is taken out of context. You need to read that in context. Read the scriptures before, read it after, read the historical and grammatical context of what this scripture is saying, and you'll see that the way that you were taught it is not right. And so we watched these different videos of all of these different groups, but I sat there and I'm like, well, this is pretty extreme. Like Jonestown, like that's insane. Like the whole Kool-Aid cyanide thing, like that's not going to happen. But then this, David was his name, the exit counselor. He would say like, I'm not saying this is what you're in, but I'm saying there are parallels. The degree of control and the way that these scriptures are being used. He said, I'm not saying it's the same as what you're watching, but there are so many parallels and it's so similar that it can eventually lead to this. And so like there were times I remember sitting there, I was in my pajamas. I don't think I had showered in a couple days. I was like, I had my feet up on the chair and I was literally rocking back and forth. If you would have seen me, you might have thought that I was going insane. But it was like, I didn't know, like, I just didn't even know how to cope with what was being thrown at me. But it was done in such a gentle way.
Okay, I was just about to ask.
It was so gentle and so kind.
Because you know what I think is very interesting here is the opposite of, because I would find it very personally very difficult to sit down with a man myself from past experiences and have a guy like try to educate or try to like help me along in the way. And I feel like even the fact that you would have been dealing with a leader day in, day out who was like aggressive, abusive, manipulative. I was going to say, how did this guy approach these conversations that you would be able, now maybe because you were used to, you know, having discussions with a male leader, this was easier for you, but it sounds like he really knew how to draw you into the conversation.
Yeah, no, he was very gentle about it. Like he was just such a kind soul and just quiet, but he knew his stuff. Like afterwards, Terry asked me one time, he said, if we would have found someone who didn't know their scripture, like if they were exit counselor, got people out of cults, but not like Bible-based cults, do you think it would have still had the same impact? And I said, absolutely not. Like, because that was the foundation for me, because I believed that what I was doing was of God. I believed that I was following him and this is where I was supposed to be. But then it was, slowly crumbled. But I feel like it helped me in the future to build it back up in a healthy scriptural way.
Is it at this point that you're like, I need to leave?
At the end of the week, they obviously would have wanted me to say, yeah, I'm leaving. But I felt at that time, because I was so devoted, I was like, no, like, these are my friends. These are people that I've been close to for 10, 12 years. I need to go back, but I will take some time, reflect on this, think about it, and kind of see what decision I make. And so I end up going back. I fly home. They knew in the group everything that had happened. I was pretty open with them about what took place. And so they did actually a good job of being like giving me my space. And so there were times where I just was like, I can't go to this meeting. I can't go to this. And they gave me space, but it's because they knew that it probably would have pushed me out faster. And so I know, looking back, that it was so strategic. But at one point I did go to a smaller meeting with the leader. And at one point he said something to me. He started reading a scripture. And then he said, isn't this like gentle? This is how like Jesus is. Isn't this like, that's not what you would have experienced in Cochrane. And at that point was probably one of the first times where I actually confidently disagreed with what he said, but I didn't say it to him. I was just, I didn't say anything. Later, I was talking to my friend and I said, no, I said, it was gentle. It was kind, the way that it was approached. And so I went back for about 2 weeks, and it was 2 weeks of the worst. I would say it was pretty awful. Just trying, like, I took some of the resources. I was reading these books. I spent hours on park benches, walking around, reading, trying to figure out what the heck I was going to do and just make sense of this. But at that point, I didn't trust people in the group, and I didn't trust my family. So I was completely alone.
Are you at this point like, I'm in a cult? Like, this is a cult?
I don't think I was ready to say it at that point. No, it was shortly after I left. But I was so afraid to say anything negative against the group still at that time. Yeah. And so I kept on reading. And then at one point, it was a Friday. So every Friday we would go down to this building and we would clean. All the women would go and clean it. And so I decided, like, before wasn't going to anything, but I had that Friday, I called my brother-in-law, which even at that time I was like, it seems bizarre to anyone outside of the situation, but my heart was pounding with calling him, because I shouldn't have been calling him. I should have just been going to God about any of these questions that I had, or even someone within the group. But I was just like, I have to talk to someone. And so I called Terry and I just said, I don't know what to do. I go one day feeling like I need to leave. It's time. Then the next day, no, I need to stay. The next day, I need to leave. And it was just this back and forth of so much turmoil. I'm still working at the time, which my employers, God bless them, were incredible, where I was able to kind of deal with it and take some time throughout this whole process. And so I talked to Terry, and he just said, sometimes you have to rip the Band-Aid off. Like, this isn't, you're not saying that you're going to leave forever, but it takes, they say, I think it's like 3 to 6 months for this fog to clear, because you've been so like indoctrinated and in this intense group for so long. But for you to take a step back and take some time to actually look at everything that's been thrown at me. And so I was like, okay. And so that night I went to cleaning. No one knew it. I was saying goodbye to my closest friends at the time. And then the next morning I'm like in tears, and I tell my one friend who was my sponsor, and I just said, I've decided to leave. But her reaction and her facial expression was, to this day, I think back and I think it's so awful. Like, she's just like, really? Like, you've decided? And I said, yeah. I said, I'm not drawing a line in the sand. Maybe I'll be back. And she's like, yeah, like, kind of like, yeah, right, you're gone. And then she's like, so what are you going to do? Go stay with Terry and Jackie? And just really not nice. And I said, I don't really know yet. And so the next day, my brothers came with my dad and helped move me out of this house that I was living in. I moved out with Terry and Jackie just for a week found a basement suite, moved in there on my own, and I completely started my life over.
So you like move into this basement suite and you decide to build your life again.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what does that look like for you? Like life after cult, right? And then where you are now, because you're married, you've said I know you have a stepson and you have a beautiful baby and a handsome husband. So you've come a very long way since a little basement suite by yourself. Like, what did that look like for you afterwards?
Yeah. Honestly, it was like Terry did a good job of finding people and resources to help if or when people were to leave. But one thing he did after he left was he reached out to all these different family members, basically to shed a light on what was going on with their family. Like, why did they drop off the face of the earth? Why don't they want to spend time with you? So that there wouldn't be like resentment and bitterness built up towards them, so that they have an understanding of what they're going through right now, and knowing that it is manipulation, that it's not actually your family member, and for them to just have grace and to love them through it. And because if they were to do the opposite and like come at them, whatever, it drives you closer into the group. And so he did a really good job of just informing people, bringing some different information, and providing some resources that he had found for people to read, so they were prepared if one of their family members or loved ones were to leave, for them to know how to handle that. And there was a psychologist who he got in touch with, and she, one of my other friends who had left before me, I had went to see her. I actually had set a meeting with her before I had decided to leave the group. But then I think I ended up going to another meeting, and then I got scared and I canceled it. But then after I left, I started seeing her. So she's a psychologist who helps with like spiritually abusive groups, other type of abusive groups. And so she was really good for me to sit and just talk and process things with, a third party who wasn't someone in my family, right? Who she knew the history, so it was a lot easier going to her and talking about these things, because I didn't have to start from square one. But she was just really good with helping, like, so CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, is one thing that she specializes in, and in just helping, like, because she said there are pathways in your brain that were destroyed from this group, and we need to rewire those. And so different things that we would just talk through, or even there was such a fear after leaving that I was going to end up, whether, like I said, was going to end up in an abusive relationship, that I was going to have zero self-confidence, and I'm just going to run to the next guy who gives me attention. Like, that's fully the view I had of myself before leaving. And so I had that fear. And then, so yeah, I left and started, like, I did start going to Elam, maybe church in the city, a month or so after, because that was where my sister and brother-in-law went. It was bigger, I could hide, and there were other people there who knew about the intervention, so it just felt safe to go and be there. And my family was so good at taking a step back and just letting me figure things out, because that's one thing, if you like rush at someone after leaving something like that, like Terry describes it really well, and I feel like it's in one of the books, but like, you have someone who is in a car wreck, and if you see them laying in the ditch, you run up to them and you want to like grab them, embrace them, you want to see if they're okay, but you don't know that they have broken ribs, broken neck, broken bones. You can't see it sometimes on the outside. And so he says you have to be gentle, you have to go slow, and you have to just let us kind of figure it out. And so that's what my family did. Like, they just took a step back. I knew that they were there when I needed them. They were really good at not like making me feel like I was alone, but also let me just figure it out. And so there was a period of time where I was just like, because obviously it was a spiritually abusive group. And so my relationship with God and with Christianity was so distorted, and trying to decide, okay, do I believe in God? Is this still like, do I still have a faith? And trying to process all of that. And then And also rebuilding relationships, trying to find friends, finding a community. Like I didn't have any of that anymore.
How did you take care of yourself in that time after you left?
I gave myself grace with like finding relationships. I saw my psychologist. I saw her on a regular basis, was really open with her. I needed people around me. And so that's why I like jumped into like joining certain groups. It's funny, we joke about going from one extreme to the next because we went from this group right into CrossFit. And I went with Terry and Jackie for years to CrossFit, and we go to like 6 a.m. class, and it's just like we went from one extreme to the next. But that was really like physical health was really important. And just, surrounding myself with people and talking it out. And one thing that was so good for me was being open about my experience, because I was so afraid before, and I was I was scared to say anything negative against it. But after I left, I had such a degree of confidence that what I was in was not okay, that it brought so much freedom speaking about it. Wow. Because I knew that what I was saying was my experience and it was true. It was just facts of what happened, and being able to, after having 10 to 12 years of not being able to talk about what you're in and what your entire life revolves around, to being free to speak about it was life-changing.
That's super awesome. Yeah. Victory, we've just like loved having you on. And I just think, again, I'm sitting here being like, we need a part 2, 3, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
Have you back.
Right. No, this was so good. Thank you for being so vulnerable with us, and like for sharing a story that I don't think a lot of people will have, or might not even know anyone, or maybe they do. So hopefully they've been able to see some real hope, right? If they themselves are sitting there going, my family is in something, or I have a loved one in a situation that I'm not sure how to approach, there is hope, and there is a lot of life after like leaving a cult. So thank you so much for coming. We're going to end this with asking you if you want to share with our clients, our audience. I'm in work mode. Our audience, your favorite piece of advice that you've ever been given, or that you really love to share with others.
Yeah. Well, because we just went through this whole experience that I went through, I would honestly say, as a Christian, and if you're a Christian or even like a Bible reader, context is key. That has been so important for me, going back into like rereading scripture that was so ingrained in me in a certain way, but going and reading it in actual context and in the way that it was meant to be written, who it was written for. I feel like that context is so important, instead of just like proof texting and opening up and reading one scripture and being like, oh, taking that for me, where it's like, was it actually meant for you? But that, I would say, just from this experience, that would be the most important thing that's helped.
I think cherry picking can be so dangerous, and I would totally agree with you. Yeah. Context is so important, and that can apply to anything, like news, any sort of piece of literature that you're reading. It's so important to understand who it was written to, right? And the context behind it.
Can I say just 3 different books that were huge?
Oh my gosh, please.
Some different resources. Some different people that I've talked to afterwards have asked, like, hey, what's something, because I know someone in a group similar to this. So for a Bible-based group, Twisted Scriptures is a book that was super important after leaving. It was wild reading it and just hearing scriptures that I heard in one way, but then how it's meant to be read. So Twisted Scriptures, The Subtle Power of Spiritual Abuse. The authors, I don't know off the top of my head. And the third one would be Combating Cult Mind Control. Those 3 books were huge for me in leaving. And
we'll link them in the show notes.
Sounds good. Yeah. Thanks for having me, ladies.
Oh my gosh, we loved it so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us on this episode of the Her Podcast. If you want to follow along with us, you can find us on Instagram and TikTok at its.her.podcast. We can't wait to see you there.